All right, you guys, welcome to another part of the series of developing the perfect physique. Obviously, I do not have the perfect physique, but I'm gonna try and help you develop your perfect physique. Today, we are focusing on legs. We're gonna do some practical applications and make sure that you guys know exactly what it is that you need to do in order to develop your best legs possible. So the first thing we're gonna talk about is how to develop the quads. Because the quads, I mean, come on, they're the most prominent feature of the legs. So if you don't have big quads, you don't have big legs. The quad. First thing that you're gonna want for your quads is you're going to want some type of pressing movement. There are many different variations this can take. If I had to list my favorites would go in order of this. It would go pendulum or hack, Smith machine, and then, if necessary, maybe we go to a free weight. Oh, there's also a pit shark option, but I have not used it much, so I know a lot of people like it, but I don't wanna put it forward to you if I've not done it myself. But a hack squat, or pretty much any pressing variation, should be thought of in a couple ways when it comes to the quads. If you put your feet very close together, then what that's gonna do is that's gonna take other muscle groups out of the equation that might be coming in. If you take and you have your feet super high up, then what that's gonna do is that's gonna bring your glutes into it a little bit more, because the glutes are gonna have better leverage as you get down to depth to actually give you some force output. So if you're trying to make this more quad biased, what you're gonna wanna do is you're gonna wanna take a little bit narrower stance and have your feet further down on the platform. Now, if you wanted to have the adductors help out a little bit, yeah, you could take and you can widen your feet out a little bit. But if you wanna make it a bit more quad focused, feet lower on the platform, this is going to allow the knees to drive out over the toes. But as you can see, when I get to here, my knees kind of come back, which isn't necessarily a problem, but it does mean maybe there's a slight possibility that I could get a little bit more knee flexion. I don't have the most flexible ankles. If you do, then you can do this perfectly fine. Oh, there we go. So that is just going to place a little bit more emphasis on the quads than if I was to have my feet a little bit higher. You can play around with it, see what works well for you. In the end, if you want to make it more quad biased, feet together, lower on the platform. If you don't really care if the adductors come into it, which most people don't, and honestly, a lot of people could use adductor work anyways, then just take a little bit wider foot placement. If you want to get more glutes, put it up here. We're talking about the quads, so let's move on to our next thing, which is going to be leg extensions. All right, so the one thing that I really like about leg extensions, or at least this particular leg extension, is the fact that this seat can come pretty far back. Not everything will allow you to do this, but if you have a machine that allows you to put it all the way back, do that. Because you're going to find that you have a little bit more stretch and a bit better overall range of motion if you're leaned back like this. Now, I have seen people take and say, well, I'm gonna do this to make it a little bit more short and then move back to this. If that's what you wanna do, perfectly fine. I prefer to keep my hips up a little bit, get a little bit of a stretch right here, all the way through. And if you find that you're starting to max out your machine, which you'll do with a lot of leg extensions, what you just do at that point is you just take and say, all right, I'm gonna give myself a second pause at the top, allow it to come down more slowly. That way you're not having to do 30, 40 reps in order to reach failure. And if that fails, get a gym pin. Most people will be able to get everything they need to out of the first bit. Now, this is not absolutely necessary, all right? Okay? I just want to put that out there right now. But I often like to, after leg extensions, go into a sissy squat variation. Why is this? Simply because I can hit a little bit more length, because you can only go so far back on a leg extension. My hips are not fully extended. My feet are not coming all the way back to my butt, but I can fix that when I go into a sissy squat variation. Now, there's lots of ways you can do your sissy squats, but for me and for a lot of others, it's just gonna be simplest. Everybody has the machine available to them where they can take and they can put their hand on it, and then you just take, you get down into here. Now, this is where a lot of people make the mistake when they do their sissy squats. So what they're gonna do is they're gonna go like this and push themselves back up. They're gonna drop their hips down in to push themselves back up. But as soon as you drop your hips back in, you've turned it into a press, which is not what we want to do. What we want to do is we want to make it an extended hips motion. So we want the hips to lead up. If the hips are leading up, then we know we're actually using the targeted muscle groups, and we're making it a little bit more about the rectus femoris, a little bit less about the vastus lateralis, medialis, and the medius. So not absolutely necessary, but you guys know I enjoy the pain. You guys know that I like to throw that in at the end. And if there is any possible benefits that you could get out of that little bit more length, it's gonna cover your bases. Now, obviously, you guys know how to develop quads for the most part. So we just need to get that out of the way. But a lot of people don't really think about the other muscle groups and how to perform those exercises. And they don't really think too deeply on it. They just toss some things in here and there. But I'm gonna get you guys thinking about the absolute best way to develop the rest of your legs, because you need to have complete legs. I think there's so much emphasis on the quads all the time. People completely forget about the calves. They forget about the adductors, and then they forget about the glutes. The adductors are probably the most neglected body part that make a visual impact in your physique out of any that I've seen in bodybuilding. A lot of times people will be like, oh yeah, you don't need to do shoulder press because of the fact that the front delts are always overdeveloped. Okay, but everybody could stand to gain by having a little bit bigger adductors. I think I saw one guy who had overdeveloped adductors and it looked funny, but that's probably not you, and you probably aren't going to have to worry about it. So an isolated adductor movement is absolutely amazing, and it will completely transform the way your legs look if you've been neglecting them up to this point. So what you want to do with your adductors, so you want to find a spot at which you're going to be able to get a good deep stretch with it before coming back in. Now, this is gonna be different for everybody. For me, I don't really have that much flexibility through my adductors, but I make sure that I'm taking it to my full range. And they're much stronger in this bottom position than they are when they get to the top. So even if I'm able to get full repetitions to here, at some point or another, I'm only gonna be able to pull to about here-ish. Just because I can only pull to here-ish doesn't mean that my adductors aren't getting work. So I continue to work them, and I continue to try to pull them all the way in, but even if they can't go all the way in, it's not a big deal. Keep working them until you die. But be careful, you want to build up the weight slow. You don't want to put it so wide that it snaps you up. Overall though, isolated adductor work is fantastic. Some people will already have them simply because they do deep squats and they get a lot of stretch and they get a lot of development from that. But I think there are less people that have that than think they have that, because they just look at their legs and they're like, yeah, there's a little bit here, but they don't realize if they fill in this gap even more, it just gives a visual pop to your legs from the front that you're not going to have otherwise. Now, probably the machine that people do the most unnecessarily is this one. I don't know why, but people love this. Like, they do it all the time. I think it's because they can feel a little bit of a burn when they do it, but this, sorry, it's just not really doing anything for you. So if this is currently in your routine and you think you're getting a lot out of it, I hate to be the bearer of bad news, it's not really gonna do much for your physique. Now, the controversial one, the leg curl, because this one is a little interesting. I don't think that the lying hamstring curl is as bad as people say, because there have been studies that have shown that you get better growth out of the seated leg curl versus the lying ham curl. Does that mean that you're not going to get good growth out of the lying ham curl? I don't believe so. If you want to use a lying ham curl, that's perfectly fine. You're still getting good range, you're still getting good work out of the hamstrings, and if you want to keep this in your program, I do not think that's going to make or break your hamstring development. If you told me that I could only choose one, right, for the rest of my life, lying hamstring curl, seated hamstring curl, I'm gonna choose the seated hamstring curl, because one, it does get that better length, and two, just the stability that you have while you're performing the movement, your ability to just lock in and hold yourself in place and just put pure work into the hamstrings, it's unmatched, because there's multiple points of contact here that just keep you set in place. Figure out your machine, figure out your leverages. The less you have to actually think about what you're doing, the better. And I think that's what people fail to realize when it comes to doing machine-oriented or highly stable movements. Is they're like, well, you just don't want to like work hard. You just don't want to. It's like, no, I want to work hard. I want to work as hard as I possibly can for whatever it is I'm trying to work for. And what happens is the more you have to worry about stability, the more you have to worry about external factors, the less hard you can push the exact thing that you're trying to focus on. So when I don't have to think about anything and I'm just sitting like this and all I have to think about is just pushing and just working hard through this motion, it's like nothing else is limiting me, because I'm stable here, I'm stable there. This is the only motion that I can do. Even if I wanted to do it wrong, I couldn't. Like, what am I gonna do wrong from here? Like, there's really nothing you can do wrong. I shouldn't say nothing. I'm sure somebody will find some way to mess something up. But the more you can target that muscle group and make it all about just moving that weight and not about, am I gonna be balanced? Am I going to have my butt coming off? Like you might with a hamstring curl on this laying down one. There's so many factors that you can just get rid of if you position the machine properly and appropriately for your particular physique and for your leverages. If I'm gonna go over here and I'm gonna do a barbell squat, getting my feet set, going down here, it's like as you come down, you can feel it, especially if you haven't squatted a free-weight barbell in a while, you can feel that there's a little bit of back and forth movement as your body's trying to figure out where your best leverages are going to be. Does that mean that it is a bad movement? No, it does not. Does that mean that you can't get growth out of it? No, it does not. But the less you have to focus on those external variables, the more you can focus on just developing the quads, just developing the adductors, just developing, which we haven't talked about yet, the glutes. The one interesting thing that we have seen with the glutes, and this has been something that's been studied, is it 100% known for an absolute certainty? I'm sure certain influencers would tell you. I'm not going to say that it's known for sure, but we have seen that the glutes at the very least do develop very, very well from short position work. Maybe as well as they do from lengthened work. So if I was trying to isolate my glutes and I did not want anything else to be a limiting factor, then I'm absolutely going to use a hip thrust machine, because at this point we got everything focused on the glutes. The quads can't jump in, well, like nothing can jump in. It's just going to be straight, direct glute work. Now, probably the biggest issue I see with this machine is people, because they can, will load it up with a lot of plates. And what they'll do is they'll load it up with a lot of plates, and this is what it looks like. They do this. The difference between this and this is a world of stimulation when it comes to the glutes. Make sure you're actually taking and fully extending those hips, getting a full intense contraction for the glutes. And if you do that, and you start to build it up over time, you're gonna grow like crazy. Now, probably my favorite overall exercise, let's say we could only choose one exercise for the legs, all right? I know, crazy world, because we have so many options available to us. But let's say we could only choose one leg exercise to do for the rest of our lives to develop as freaky of legs as possible. I would actually choose the Smith machine barbell squat, because one, it's more stable than the regular squat, and two, I guess that probably is the only reason. But if I take, let's say this, okay? So I take a wide stance, right? And then I allow the knees to go over the toes, but I also allow my body to come forward a little bit. Right now, I am working 3 muscle groups pretty darn hard. I am working the adductors, I am working the quads, and I am working the glute. So if I was very, very limited on time, and I only had one exercise that I could do, it might be this one. Simply because of the fact that it can hit a lot of different muscle groups in a very short period of time. But we usually don't have to make that option. So similar to the way that we were doing with the hack squat, you can take and you can do a narrower stance, where this is gonna be more quads oriented. You can do a little bit wider stance, but make sure that it's a high bar and stay upright, so it's more quads and adductors oriented. Or if you wanted to make it more glutes oriented, all you'd have to do, place the bar lower, change your foot position a little bit, and then see that? Because this right here is what's going to stretch the glutes. If I have my body coming a little bit more forward, and I'm getting a deep stretch for the glutes there, that is going to be a more glute-oriented movement than if I was to bring my legs in, get it on a high bar, and allow my knees to come over my toes. So whenever you're trying to think quads, adductors, glutes, always think about foot position, because that's going to change everything for you. Now, the real reason you guys are here is, how do you actually apply this? How do you actually go through and turn this into a solid routine so you can develop the best legs possible? There's no one answer, all right? But what I'm going to tell you is this: if you're somebody who pushes yourself very, very hard, if you're somebody who goes balls to the wall when it comes to your quad exercises, hamstring exercises, they are very psychologically fatiguing muscle groups because there's so much tissue there. So if you're pushing yourself incredibly hard and you're trying to do 15 sets for the quads, I'm sorry, you're just gonna die. You're gonna burn out. But if you're somebody who likes to hold back a little bit, you don't necessarily push yourself to failure, maybe you do a little bit more sets. So for me, I found that my good tolerable range is somewhere around 5 to 10 sets per week for the quads. I don't really very often go below that. I don't very often go above that. That could depend on your particular training style versus my particular training style. Same thing with the hamstrings. 5 to 10 sets a week is going to be more than enough. 5 sets is more often where I land for that. But that is because I push myself incredibly hard on those exercises. So I'm not telling you guys you can't do more volume. I'm not saying that there's a hard set number here, but what you want to focus on is, are you actually able to progress over time? And if you're able to progress over time, there is no need for you to take and say, I'm going to jack the volume way up, or I'm going to absolutely slam my volume way down. And in the end, volume is something we could talk about forever. I've done videos on it. I actually have a podcast with Paul Carter on it if you want to go check that out on the channel, where if you want to get more in depth on how volume should work. But I would also say that you should probably pick somewhere between 4 to 6 exercises for a session if you're trying to work your legs. 6 if you don't work your legs as often. So let's say you only work your legs once a week, maybe 6 exercises is necessary. But if you're working your legs twice a week, maybe you only do 3 or 4 exercises. 3 being a little bit light, 4 I think is a pretty good number to have, which would mean you're getting 8 overall exercises in the course of a week. And then you can take and you can focus on one body part or the other. So if you're saying, you know what, I want to have a hamstrings focused day, maybe you have 2 hamstring oriented movements. Which reminds me, I forgot to show you guys one of my favorite hamstring movements, which is just an SLDL. So what you want to do is you want to figure out where's that sticking point for you where you can no longer get any more length without rounding your back way over. So for me, that's probably somewhere around here, which means the bar should be a little bit lower. So what I would do is I would actually get a plate and I would stand on a plate while doing this. Or there's nothing wrong with this. You can always take and go over to the free weights like this gentleman is doing here. If you have the option to do free weight or machine, typically the machine is going to be a better option just because you're able to focus less on stability and more on power output, which there is this here as well, which is the pit shark, which also works very well for keeping you stable while you're doing the movements. So if I was going to use the pit shark, I would be using it like this, right? This right here is a very good handle to use for it. And what you do is you attach it down here. Now I know a lot of you aren't going to have this machine, so I don't want you thinking I can't develop the best possible if I don't have this, but if you do have it, it's a great machine. And then all you're doing is just taking, all right, legs straight up. Fantastic machine if you have it available. If you don't stress. There's lots of other ways to do it. Smith machine or free weight or dumbbells. You could do barbell or dumbbells for your SLDLs. But overall, the legs are one of those muscle groups that a lot of people don't want to think about, but there is so much contractile tissue down there that if you're not focusing on developing your best legs, you're always going to be underdeveloped from a muscular standpoint, and very underdeveloped. If you have somebody who has big legs and a moderate sized upper body versus somebody who has moderate sized legs and a big upper body, who's going to weigh more? Always the guy that has bigger legs, because of the fact that these are the largest muscle groups in the body. And we could talk about calves, but I know nobody likes to train calves. So if you want to know how to train calves, it's very, very simple. Straight leg variations. Spend more time in the stretch, about 3 to 4 seconds in the stretch before coming back up, because that's where the majority of the growth happens. Now, I know I zoomed through this. I know I just went from one thing to the next to the next. I know it's a lot of information, but if you guys are consistent with these things, if you guys take and you use them over time, you're going to develop amazing legs. And there is nothing wrong with doing free weight exercises if you enjoy them, okay? I'm completely okay with it. But if you're just worried about placing tension on muscle groups, you do not need free weights. You can do this with machines, and the machines probably will be a little bit better bang for your buck if you apply these principles over time. TNF Biotech.